Hello and welcome to my review of the year. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is Property TV. With the thought that COVID had firmly been put behind us, the optimism at the beginning of the year gave us all hope for the coming year's business. However, the feeling didn't last for long. Starting from an all-time low in January 23, the levels did increase gradually to peak in September, but have since fallen again. Simply rising interest rate costs were the influencing factor here. There's of course been lethargy in the market, resulting in the lowest number of house sales for a decade, falling by 21% year on year. The associated data on housing prices shows significant falls for the year, although some agents report various regionalised pockets of strong activity. Naturally, the increased costs of a mortgage and the shortage of reasonably priced housing for sale have had the inevitable effect on the rental market. According to a number of data providers, rental costs have risen by circa 9% during 2023, and predictions suggest that there will be no let-up in the increase going into 2024. So apart from the general shortage of housing across the country, what's causing the explosion in rental prices? To my mind, the problem is government. But before I comment, let's hear what one of our buy-to-let experts, Ryan Hughes, had to say when he was answering a viewer's question on my Property Question Time programme. With the new legislation affecting no-fault evictions, how do the panel think this will change the face of the rental industry? I mean, we were talking off camera about going back to the, just trying to think now, late 80s, I guess. And well, from the 60s to the 80s, when we had people like Rackman who were adept at getting people out of fixed tenancies by whatever means were necessary. It was I think you mentioned in the show before, a bit like the Wild West. It really was then, certainly in London. And then Margaret Thatcher brought in the assured short-hold tenancies, which gave the landlord an assured period, gave the tenant an assured period. In other words, the landlord knew exactly, without any fuss, when he could get his property back. Yeah. And that brought a lot of people into the rental market, and it saved the day in terms of housing stock, didn't it?
Yeah.
But where are we going with what's happening now? I think it's going into reverse.
It's very much going into reverse, and people that own these assets are losing control of their assets. Without people policing it correctly, they're letting people build up rent arrears in massive amounts because we know the house builders have slowed down. There's not enough houses for them to go into. So they're just saying, well, just stay up there and, build the rent arrears up. But they're not supporting the landlord with the rent arrears or the mortgage payments. I suppose it starts when you're taking that tenant on initially, that you have a very good, transparent relationship with them. I've spoke about it previously where even if you do have a lettings and management company, you are still a point of contact for them to make sure if people lose their jobs or circumstance change where they can't afford the rent, where you come to some sort of agreement rather than, all of a sudden they've gone into rent arrears and you just want your property back. The landlords need some support. It's a very much, here's the tenant, this is the changes. We've already seen them change on they've changed on the standards that the tenants can live in by backing off from the money put into the properties to make them a higher standard. They've now said, well, actually, you don't need to do that now. But actually, you potentially can't get your property back.
Yeah, exactly.
It's taken away from the tenants and then taken away from the landlords rather than working together.
Well, that's Ryan's view. My view is that government should not interfere in the market, let alone legislate, when it's clear that they do not fully understand the industry they seek to influence. A classic example of this was the proposed enforcement of insulation and energy efficiency regulations that were to be introduced. To anyone who even had a slight understanding of the buy-to-let market, it was clear that many rental properties would never reach the required standards. For an example, a converted and divided Victorian property would be almost impossible to re-engineer to meet the requirements, no matter what you spent. After all, it's no good insulating the loft if all you're doing is forcing air out through the front door letterbox instead of the roof. After much lobbying, the government decided to ditch this policy and park it for the foreseeable future. Well, that was good news for some, but not good news for the many hundreds of landlords that because of the fears and inability to conform with the new regulations, sold at a discount their portfolios. Net effect, a further factor, the creation of further shortages in the rental market and further rental rate increases. The much heralded restrictions on creating new leasehold arrangements in the housing market seems, if Mr. Gove's explanation is to be believed, was accidentally missed out from the new reform bill due to an attempt to legislate at speed. You couldn't make it up, could you? I do worry that even if the government get the drafting of this new bill right and the regulations attract the right kind of proper results, I wonder if our already burdened courts will be able to cope. I asked Property TV's contributing legal expert, Colin Jermyn, that very question.
I think we've got to make it very clear that it's still got a long way to go. And there's still huge amounts of campaigning going on. I don't think it's been diluted. And actually, when you're looking at moving to a single periodic tenancy system, removing Section 21s, that has huge implications. So it's really important that they drill into, the implications of that and the knock-on effects and make sure that we get it right. And I still don't think we're there. Still concerned about, antisocial behaviour. Yes, they've amended the wording on that, so it's behaviour capable of being antisocial, considered to be antisocial. But what does that mean? So there's still lots of campaigning to have that better defined in the legislation, so we all know where we are, what's considered antisocial behaviour, because what you might consider antisocial might be very different to what I consider antisocial. And that applies to the judges on the day. So that's a real concern, because Section 21 was historically used to do with antisocial behaviour, because it's incredibly difficult to gather your evidence, get people to court, to come and talk about their neighbours, give evidence against them. So that's still a huge problem. So whilst we're making progress, there's still lots to be done. And the big thing is the court reforms. And yes, they've said now that they won't abolish Section 21s until the courts are in a better position to deal with the changes. But, that needs to be measurable. And
this week,
there's
next
still
week, sometime never.
Yes, exactly. And it's such a huge task. And they're not really saying, they're giving a few ideas about how they might do it, but it's such a huge task, and it needs to be measurable, and it needs people like ourselves that are doing it day in, day out to say what we find is acceptable. And in the interest of justice. I look back, and when you used to do accelerated possession claims after you've done your 2 months notice and you issue your claim, usually take about 6 weeks to get it through, to get your possession order. And the same with the rent arrears claim, 6 weeks to get your court hearing date. We're nowhere near those timescales at the moment. So there's a huge amount to be done. We're not even achieving it at the moment. So if you get rid of Section 21 and all those claims need a hearing and people to have their day in court, then there's a long way to go.
With property sales and pricing on a downwards trend, with the imposition of higher interest rates, has it become more difficult for developers to secure construction finance? If so, I guess this is going to aggravate the shortage of housing in the UK.
Seems to be the same answer always, doesn't it? That funding is key for developers to be able to construct these large-scale developments, and to get bank finance at the moment is incredibly expensive to do so.
Expensive or difficult?
Both.
Both.
It's definitely expensive, which makes it difficult, because therefore it makes a lot of schemes much less viable than perhaps they were 12, 18 months ago. And that's where the big difference is. So you will have developers at the moment that will perhaps sitting on a piece of land that when they purchased it, the viability worked because they put their calc in as a borrowing at a certain rate, and now they're borrowing at 2 to 3 times as much as that. And of course, it makes the development not work. That is why there are so fewer startups at the moment. Yeah,
and I think again, the government were accusing developments of sort of land banking, weren't they, causing the problem? And I don't really think that's the case, because I think if you've got land banked, you'll be looking at the viability of that site on a sort of monthly or quarterly basis to find the optimum starting point, won't you?
Which is too expensive to land bank anyway. You can't hold it and do nothing with it. You do need to be developing it and trying to realise its end value.
And, Nikki will know this now, there's a lot of specialist lenders like buy-to-let lenders, bridging lenders, small commercial property lenders. Do you find that the development finance field is getting to be specialist? So in other words, if you're building 70 stories here, but a housing estate over there with single unit houses, would you be using the same financier?
Probably different banks, different horses for courses is the reality of it. So the large international banks would be taking on a 70-story tower because they can see the asset value at the end of the day. And you might be able to go to a clearing bank or to an old-fashioned merchant bank style to develop a housing estate. Yeah.
Let's look now at the construction industry. Whenever I hear the government say we're going to build so many houses this year, I want to ask, who's we? It's time government realised that if developers can be sure of selling their product post-construction, they'll build as much housing stock as you can manage. It's all about funding. As a matter of fact, apart from the deposit, renting has in some areas become more expensive than buying. It's not a question of developers hoarding land or matters of planning. It's all about mortgages, easy access and low deposits. That's what's needed. The construction industry itself is seeing a downward correction in material costs, so hopefully that will feed through to final house prices, easing the pressure on the market. But again, even at slightly reduced prices, funding will be critical. I asked Dave Forde, one of our construction experts appearing on Property Question Time, how he saw the coming year for the industry and what trends and practices would be new to the industry in the coming year.
I think we're going to see rapid change purely because the government has dictated this is what's going to happen. They talk about their, I don't know what they call it, their net zero 2030, 2050 or whatever. So we will see increasing use of modern methods of construction, not just for the green advantages of it, just because purely they're just better, they're more efficient, they're quicker. The cost has come down to the same as traditional build now.
That's it.
So we will see that. And a lot of this retrofitting that is planned, it's been worked out that it'd be quicker, easier and cheaper to just demolish places and build new ones rather than trying to retrofit the old stock.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I know years ago we've been used to having sort of properties lasting 100 years, haven't we? I mean, here in Docklands, I've had conversations where, you know, people have been looking at buying 20-year-old buildings and demolishing them because they didn't go high enough in those days and whatever. So it's cheaper just to buy, demolish, take the site value and build up again. Quite a complex issue, isn't it? Are you hopeful for the industry?
Definitely, yeah. It's been a rocky few years after the COVID and the supply chain issues, but I know house building has gone down a bit, but that's affected by interest rates, mortgages, etc. No, the industry is thriving. There's work everywhere, all over the country. I think 2024 is looking good.
Our agency friends are reporting mixed data in terms of property sales. However, one trend that is for sure is that of self-employed brokers operating in niche or specialist areas. I'm guessing that the trend here was actually started or encouraged by the creation of the Purple Bricks business model. It's just that these self-employed Purple Brickers have in large numbers decided to go it alone without the corporate backing. I'm not convinced that these boys and girls have either the knowledge or the experience to maintain a good industry service. The self-employed super prime self-employed agent is often filling the gap of a secondary agent linked to some of the leading firms. They can often get that secondary instruction as they're not seen as a competing corporate body. I suppose the question mark around self-employed agents securing solus instructions will be decided by vendors who may or may not have the confidence in the broker without the backup and support of a recognised body. I guess time will tell. However, one should reflect on the fact that the property market has never been keen or indeed swift to embrace new practices. Talking of new practices, the hottest topic of conversation this year has been the take-up and introduction of AI into agency. All a bit beyond me, so let's listen to what Richard Murray, CEO of Eurolink, has to say.
Yeah, AI, I've talked about AI on this programme before. It's, and I think I said at the time, it's not going away. It's a huge industry already. And I think now, since that programme, we've seen that, you know, it's sort of everyone's talking about sort of chat GPT and using it now on a fairly normal basis, I guess, in their workplace. From a sort of sales and lettings perspective, I think chatbots are probably the most widely used application of AI at the moment. Probably, I would say. I think they've got a great place. I think in an agency's sort of service set. I think some agencies might be concerned about AI. I think some agencies might be concerned about using chatbots, at losing that kind of personal service or personal touch. They want to talk to people. It's a people business. And that, I think, is maybe where some agents might struggle to adopt. However, if you focus on things like procedural support, so I don't know, if an applicant's filling out their referencing, for example, or their anti-money laundering documents for their landlords, if there's quick questions they want answering at the time, in real time, I think chatbots are a great example of how AI is already helping the industry. I think, taking it down to a really sort of basic level, just think of a negotiator going out on a market appraisal, seeing a property, taking some notes, but then coming back and using one of the AI tools to generate their property particulars. It won't be perfect, but it will take a lot of the work out of what they're doing. So lots of time savers, but again, look, my belief is that it will help support repetitive business processes, aggregating data, really driving better business decisions, has always been my take on AI.
Has the proposed introduction of new letting regulations and their subsequent watering down, and in some cases postponement or negation, caused unnecessary disturbance in the market and its ability to fund new activities? Well, we desperately need housing. I think, Ian, I'm going to come to you first to carry on pretty well where we left off before the break. Is this disturbing borrowers wanting to borrow and lenders wanting to lend?
Yeah, I think it is. I think you do have a number of landlords out there that have a small portfolio, perhaps only single unit, which they let. And for them, it's not really that attractive to have this continual flip-flopping of policy. Certainly the EPC changes that were due to come in 2025 now seem to have been postponed or just indefinitely cancelled. But there would have been a lot of people that would have seen that on the horizon and would have been planning. Either they would have taken action now, perhaps in between tenancies, or planning to do so in the future. There's a lot of capital expenditure that needs to be invested in the portfolio to do that. So they perhaps decided, well, actually, do you know what? This isn't worth the hassle. I'm going to move away. I'm going to sell. But they're perhaps coming to the market at suboptimal time. So they're being forced to sell at a time where perhaps they're not going to realise the true, or what they thought was the true value of the property. So that has consequences as well. So I do think, there's with all of these things, when you think about it as on its own, it doesn't seem like that big a problem or change. But when you think about it across society, it has huge implications and a lot of knock-on effects. Again, as Carly said earlier on, is that these consequences are not always thought about because there's always unintended consequences, and it's impossible for us to model and certainly the people that draft these laws to think about them all. So yes, there is definitely people, I'm sure, that have exited, and I know of friends that have exited the market because of this legislative agenda.
We've had a productive year here at Property TV, a new studio, engagement with many more professional and interesting contributors. Our channel is now attracting 6 million plus viewers per month. Our Property TV programme broadcasts at peak times, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 8 till 9 p.m. on Sky 186. We have recently added Business TV to our portfolio of programmes, widening our subject matter to interviews and feature programmes looking at the wider business world. You can view these programmes on Mondays from 8, again on Sky 186. So there we are, a look at the year, the past, a present and a glimpse into the future, maybe into what 2024 has in store for our industry. So may I wish all our viewers, our contributors and associates a happy and a very prosperous and exciting new year.